was a chilling intro to remind you of the DTC chill order that I mentioned in the previous Part 3 video. When a stock spins off into an ineligible security, as is the case with our MMTLP shares, I quote DTC, these shares are initially chilled for all DTC activity until DTC exits the ineligible security to you. Meaning, MMTLP is likely chilled until DTC allocates the next bridge shares in its possession to the individual brokers that hold MMTLP shares. The chill will end when DTC completes its allocation and exits this situation. After this occurs, the brokers and their clients will have to complete the distribution process among themselves. In this video, I will review DTC's Reorganization Service Guide.
Please note that it has been updated and now shows the date of January 1st, 2023. Earlier in the week, the same guideline was dated December 15th, 2022.
If you have questions about reorganization processing or a specific event, contact DTC's Customer Support Center at 1-888-382-2721. If my followers would like me to make a call and upload it, let me know in the comment box. On page 10, DTCC gives their definition for reorganization services. I quote, DTC's reorganization service provides full lifecycle processing, including sourcing and announcing the details of upcoming events, accepting and acting on instructions, and collecting, allocating, and reporting on the resulting entitlements on behalf of participants holding DTC-eligible securities serviced by the depository. The reorganization service leverages the economies of scale and experience of DTC to provide cost savings to issuers, agents, and participants, and ultimately to securities beneficial owners. On the same page, DTCC explains processing of a reorganization into subcategories, called instructions and allocations. Instruction processing is where DTC is provided a collection of instructions and locking of positions in a contra Q SIP for voluntary or mandatory events. My brokerage, like many other brokerages, has provided a contra Q SIP, locking my MMTLP, which entitles me to receive my next bridge hydrocarbon shares. Allocations processing is the surrender of position to the agent handling the event and allocation of entitlements based on participants' position in the security for both mandatory events and or as per participant instructions. This also applies to our situation, because the DTCC has to basically surrender the position to the agent, either AST agent or your individual brokerage, for this mandatory event. I want to specifically bring your attention to the DTCC note, which states, DTC will also accept and deliver instructions for events that will include entitlements that will not be allocated via DTC services, example, for entitlements that are not DTC eligible. Target position will be taken down based on direction from the offeror. DTC may also accept and deliver consent instructions, without surrendering position, that may not have an entitlement or assign voting or consenting rights to you in conjunction with shareholder meetings or consent solicitations. Our MMTLP has converted into non-electronic NextBridge shares that are not DTC eligible. However, the DTC is stating here that DTC has the ability to also follow instructions for entitlements that will not be allocated using DTC services. This is why, in my opinion, the DTC is involved in processing MMTLP into NextBridge shares. They are merely obtaining the NextBridge shares from the AST agent and redistributing them to various brokerages in North America and globally. The DTC goes on to explain at the bottom of page 10 and top of page 11 that 1. In certain cases, DTC may not be fully able to support a reorganizations event. 2. In such cases, DTC will announce the event informing the participants on an action to take outside of DTC, example, delivery of securities, hard copy paperwork, etc. 3. DTC will also notify its participants when an event will be handled through both DTC and an outside party where an instruction will be required via PTS/PBS or automated instruction messaging with an associated but separate action to be performed by the participant, such as the completion of a hard copy form that may need to include a VOI instruction reference, delivered directly to the agent. 4. The obligation to ensure both the instruction is made in PTS/PBS or automated instruction messaging and the required documentation is received by the agent by the expiration date is the sole responsibility of the participant. In my opinion, I interpret this to apply to our MMTLP situation and therefore expect DTC to not be fully able to support this reorganizations event because NextBridge shares are not electronic and because they may need to be provided globally. Therefore, DTC will provide instructions to the participant broker members, such as E-Trade, Questrade, TD Ameritrade, of actions to take outside of DTC such as obtaining the delivery of the physical securities. DTC will provide instructions and information to the participants via PTS/PBS messaging. However, it is the sole responsibility and obligation of the participant members to ensure the instructions are made and the required documents are received by the transfer agent before the expiration date. Please read the DTC note on the top of page 11, which states: 1. DTC has no obligation to examine for completeness or accuracy of any instruction forms or accompanying documents submitted to DTC. 2. Nevertheless, if DTC makes such an examination, and the form or accompanying documents do not appear to be complete or accurate or your general free position is insufficient, the instruction may be rejected by DTC. Now this begs the question of whether MMTLP is a mandatory or voluntary reorganization. I argue that it has characteristics of both. It is a mandatory event, but it is being set up similar to a voluntary reorganization based on my interpretation of DTC guidelines. DTC explains its mandatory reorganization service on page 20, stating, the majority of mandatory reorganizations are those reorganizations for which no election option exists, i.e., no participant input is required. DTC processes these actions and will act on your behalf. When a mandatory reorganization occurs, DTC will 1. Submit the affected securities to the agent and collect entitlements from the agent. 2. Allocate the entitlements to you, and 3. Some mandatory corporate actions result in the creation of an escrow CUSIP with position for each participant based on the position as of a certain date in anticipation of future payments. For these CUSIPs, DTC will also perform the actions noted above. Some mandatory corporate action events allow participants to input an instruction that identifies and/or certifies the beneficial owner's right to a specific entitlement based on the terms of the event, example, tax withholding based on residency, or a mandatory event with a cash-out option for positions held that are less than a certain amount. These events will be set up similar to a voluntary reorganization announcement. Now, based on my review of DTC Distribution Service Guide, I determined that DTC would exit this situation after allocating the NextBridge shares to the participant brokers. Therefore, our MMTLP situation is set up more similar to a voluntary reorganization. On the bottom of page 21, DTC explains voluntary offering services allows participants to accept various voluntary offerings within the book entry environment. DTC provides 8 possible voluntary reorganizations event types. Of the 8 possible voluntary reorganization types, I argue MMTLP is most similar to conversion, because of the option of the security to convert debt or preferred shares, normally to underlying common shares. Investors have the voluntary option to hold MMTLP shares past the record date to have their preferred shares convert into the underlying common shares of NextBridge Hydrocarbon Incorporated. Therefore, MMTLP is a voluntary reorganization conversion event. In certain cases, DTC uses ContraCUSIP numbers and RRG reorganization segregated accounts to report reorganization activity on your positions. DTC explains on page 25 that securities undergoing a reorganization are segregated from your general free account into one of the following 19 RRG reorganization segregated accounts. My brokerage, Questrade, has provided me a ContraCUSIP beginning with the letter M, which based on DTC guidelines means there is a mandatory reorganization deposits. On page 26, DTC explains ContraCUSIP's numbers are generated by DTC and used to segregate your position, representing instructions submitted for voluntary offers and put bonds options. The ContraCUSIP contains the first 3 digits of the issuer number as assigned to the security to be tendered. DTC explains a pledge characteristic of a ContraCUSIP which matches our MMTLP situation. I quote, if you have surrendered securities in response to a voluntary offering under these procedures, you can pledge the contra securities that have been credited to your account by book entry. Therefore, for the purpose of their pledge, the contra securities represent your rights through DTC to receive from the agent the cash and/or security payments based on the rate or accepted bid and/or the return of some or all of the surrendered securities in accordance with the terms of the offer. I interpret this to mean the ContraCUSIP used by my brokerage as a pledge attached, entitling them to receive security payments from the DTC for each MMTLP share they surrender. DTC explains putting chills on ContraCUSIPs for when certain reorganizations require that DTC place chills, restrictions, on physical and/or book entry activity. ContraCUSIPs are generally chilled also. The timing of the chills will vary depending upon the event type or security type, such as book entry only. Please pause this video here and read the relevant terms defined by DTC on page 28 of the Reorganization Services Guide. On page 43, DTC explains conversion services as DTC including participants with an economical and orderly method for exercising conversion privileges. Under this service, DTC will 1. Notify you of upcoming expirations and record dates for conversion privileges. 2. Process your instructions on conversions, and 3. Submit securities to agents and collect from them the underlying stock or cash. 4. Allocate underlying securities to you on the date instructions are processed or move the instructed position into a contra CUSIP until the entitlements, cash and/or securities, are determined. DTC further explains that some debt securities and preferred stocks are convertible at the option of holders. Typically, these convertible securities can be exchanged without additional payment for underlying securities, usually common stock, of the issuing corporation. Conversions are generally exercisable at a fixed rate any time throughout the life of the convertible securities and are irrevocable or convertible upon a trigger in the market. On page 44, DTC explains that on conversions where the entitlement could be cash and/or securities at a to-be-determined rate, instructions will be submitted via PTS, PTOP, PBS tender and exchanges, or automated instruction messaging, where instructed positions are moved to a contra CUSIP and proceeds are credited to your account after the price determination period. The underlying securities, once allocated, are immediately eligible for all of DTC's services, including book entry delivery and pledges for collateral loans.
In applying conversion services to our MMTLP situation, I argue we know that one MMTLP preferred share grants you one NextBridge share.
My MMTLP positions have been moved into a contra CUSIP. However, the price of NextBridge hydrocarbon shares are not yet determined and are ineligible for DTC services because they are not on an electronic book entry system. To summarize everything in this video, these are my overall conclusions, interpretations and opinions. 1. MMTLP is undergoing DTC reorganization instructions and allocations processing services. Instructions processing refers to a collection of instructions and locking of positions in a contra CUSIP/RRG for voluntary events or mandatory events. Allocations processing refers to the surrender of positions to the agent handling the event and allocation of entitlements based on participants' positions in the security. 2. MMTLP situation is mandatory, however it is set up similarly to a voluntary reorganization processing. 3. Of the 8 types of voluntary reorganizations, MMTLP fits the definition of a conversion event because of the option of the security to convert debt or preferred shares, normally to underlying common shares. 4. DTC may use contra CUSIP numbers and reorganization segregated accounts to report reorganization activity on your positions. 5. My MMTLP shares have been provided a contra CUSIP. 6. The M in my contra CUSIP M074526.90 indicates a mandatory reorganization event is taking place. 7. My MMTLP contra CUSIP has a pledge attached, for which the participant broker must surrender the MMTLP in order to be credited security payments from the DTC. 8. Certain reorganizations may require that DTC place chills, restrictions, on physical and/or book entry activity in contra CUSIPs. MMTLP has been chilled. 9. MMTLP is undergoing a DTC conversion service because the security entitlements price are yet to be determined. As a result, the MMTLP positions have been moved to a contra CUSIP. Once the price is determined, the proceeds will be credited to your account. 10. However, DTC will exit this situation after allocating the NextBridge shares in their possession, therefore, it will be for the brokers and customers to determine the price or value. This concludes my review of DTC's Reorganization Service Guide. I encourage all viewers and investors to read through this guide and contrast their interpretations. Leave any questions in the comment box and don't forget to like, follow, and share.